Mickey Joseph and I share some things in common. First, we're both from Louisiana. Second, we both spent time in New Orleans. Now, he was a coach at high school in New Orleans and also at Tulane. I went to school in New Orleans at Alice Hart Elementary and also Loyola for debate camp, although I lived in Shreveport at the time. I was going to debate camp at Loyola. Bottom line is, we're both from Louisiana, both spent a lot of time down there. I'm from Louisiana, so is Mickey Joseph. We share that in common. And we also share in common the belief that New Orleans, specifically, and Louisiana generally, is the best food in the world. Now, I don't know Mickey Joseph personally, but I'll bet you, if you were to ask Mickey Joseph, where's the best food, he'd say it was in New Orleans specifically. Well, more accurately, maybe his mom and grandma or whatever, they best, but Louisiana's got the best food. We share one other thing in common, and that is we both found our way to Nebraska. I love Nebraska. Mickey Joseph loves Nebraska. This is my home. It's where I raised my kids. I wouldn't recommend, in fact, out of all the states I've been to, Nebraska, except for the weather, is the best state. This is the good life. I love Nebraska. Not going back to Louisiana, not going back to Shreveport, not going back to New Orleans, not going back to Monroe or Pineville or Alexandria or Lake Charles or Lafayette. I'm just not going back. This is my home. I want this to be where I live the rest of my life. Well, and I'm very proud that my kids live here. And I think Mickey Joseph would probably tell you the same thing. We love Nebraska. But Nebraska just hired at head coach in Matt Rhule the most Nebraska of hires Trev Alberts, I mean the donors, could have come up with. You see, hiring Matt Rhule is kind of like having a big old bowl of oatmeal, except oatmeal with no sugar or salt or bananas or cinnamon or peanut butter, nothing. It's just a bowl of oatmeal, probably nourishing. You probably feel like you got some food in your stomach. You clean out your colon on the way out. But it's just not the same as a bowl of grits and gravy. See, if you haven't had grits, and I mean grits made the right way, if your only exposure to grits is the scene in my cousin Vinny, then you don't know what you're missing.
What's this over here?
You never heard of grits?
Sure, I heard of grits. I just actually never seen a grit before.
And Nebraska, for the entire history of hiring coaches, does not know what it's missing by staying with the same script, the same narrative, same style of coaches over and over and over. Matt Rhule at Temple and Baylor, we're told, turn these teams around. Went from irrelevant to something spectacular, right? Okay. Well, there's a couple ways you can judge a coach. Not just on win-loss record, it's quality of wins. When you look at Matt Rhule as coach at Temple and Baylor, his teams faced ranked opponents 18 times. Of those 18 times, Matt Rhule coached teams won 2 games. And those 2 games were while he was at Temple, not at Baylor. At Baylor, he was 0-11 against ranked opponents. And who did he beat at Temple? The powerhouses of East Carolina and Navy. Bowl games, 1-4. And Matt Rhule comes in as the savior for Nebraska. A guy that Carolina just cast off because he sucked so bad at Carolina. Watch this. The very argument people gave about letting Scott Frost go before his contract was up and having to pay him the extra money to send him on his way, the very argument people gave about Scott Frost, he was so bad we had to get him out, is the argument Carolina used to get rid of Matt Rhule. And some of y'all say, well, but college and pros are totally different. He's going to be a great coach at Nebraska. You know what? I don't know. I think he'll be Oatmeal. I think that Nebraska is going to win more games with him than you would with Scott Frost, but you could have won more games with me as head coach instead of Scott Frost. You could have won more games with just taking a poll, play after play after play, like fan-controlled football. If you don't know what that is, look it up.
Fan-controlled football, let you decide what happens. Get your game on.
Saying that you'll win more games with Matt Rhule is stating the obvious. It is simply stating that you're comfortable doing what Nebraska has done for the last 130 years, eating bowls of oatmeal, with the exception of some delicious oatmeal with Tom Osborne and Bob Devaney. Don't get me wrong. Those were great coaches. But to compare Matt Rhule to Bob Devaney and Tom Osborne is ridiculous. Not in the same argument. In fact, Tom Osborne, he's like having a big old bowl of grits. I'll tell you what, Tom Osborne, he is the grits to the usual Nebraska oatmeal. I'll give you that. But if Nebraska has just hired another oatmeal coach, which is what they just did, and if my analogy is true, And here's the deal. I've already told you I live in Nebraska. I love Nebraska. This is my home. I ain't going nowhere. This is where I live now. If that's the case, let me tell you something. If you live in Nebraska and you're going to eat oatmeal, I'm going to make a suggestion to Nebraska, to Trev Alberts specifically. Make sure if you serve up that oatmeal, you have a little cinnamon. You know, you get a little sugar, you get a little, some honey or some maple syrup or something, and some peanut butter and bananas. Make your oatmeal like this. If you're going to keep serving up this oatmeal to Nebraska fans, which I'm not in favor of, I'm not in favor of hiring a guy who's 2-18 or 2 out of 18 against ranked opponents, 1-4 in bowl games, turning teams around like Temple and Baylor, teams that we would laugh at. We would never call those the litmus test for Nebraska. There's no way before Scott Frost we would have accepted that a guy that turned around Temple was a guy that you wanted to bring to Nebraska. We would have said no way. We would have reached for somewhere higher than that. But if that's what Nebraska is going to do, if that's the choice, we're all here, guys. We're in Nebraska. Go Big Red. I'm okay with that, as long as we keep someone like Mickey Joseph to bring some spice from the South. And Mickey Joseph could bring more players to Nebraska, recruit better, and recruit the kind of players we want in Nebraska that will turn the team around, maybe starting next year. If Nebraska is going to go with Matt Rhule, which is what they've done, and if we're all eating the oatmeal, I'm just asking, and maybe it's asking a lot, but I hope not. I'm asking, can we spice up the oatmeal just a little bit? Some sugar, some spice, some bananas, some peanut butter, cinnamon. Because, you know, I'd rather have the grits and the gravy, but I will eat myself a big old bowl of delicious oatmeal as long as it tastes good going down. And that's some good oatmeal.